If you're seeing this, I'm almost there. Sunrise over K2, can't believe I'm part of it.
On the 14th of October, 2023, at precisely 5 hours and 41 minutes in the morning, Ryan Michael Torres stood at one of the most dangerous places on Earth. He was on the southeast face of K2, the world's second highest peak, inside a section known as the Bottleneck, a narrow and notoriously treacherous corridor of ice. He was at an altitude of 27,230 feet, more than 5 miles above sea level, where the air is so thin that every breath is a conscious, painful effort. Ryan Michael Torres, a 29-year-old American flight paramedic from Denver, Colorado, was exactly where he had dreamed of being. The temperature was a brutal 36 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, with a wind that drove the cold deeper, making it feel like nearly 60 below. Despite the hostility of the environment, the sky was perfectly clear, offering a deceptive sense of calm before the dawn. Ryan Michael Torres was part of a 14-person expedition, a group of 9 climbers and 5 expert guides, who had departed from their highest camp at 11 o'clock the previous night. Their plan was methodical and clear: reach the summit no later than 11 in the morning and begin their descent immediately, allowing a safe margin before nightfall. For nearly 7 hours, the climb had gone exactly as planned. The wind, at 28 miles per hour, was strong but manageable for K2, and the team was making good time under the stars. Before we continue to explore how this perfectly executed plan unraveled, we'd like to know where you are watching from, so please leave a comment below. If stories of human endeavor and survival in extreme environments interest you, leave a like and subscribe for more. Now, the team felt a sense of controlled optimism, a belief that the worst of the mountain was behind them. But they were wrong. In a matter of minutes, a single choice would shatter that illusion. This expedition was not a casual undertaking for Ryan Michael Torres. He had invested $67,000, the result of 3 years of intense saving and the sale of his vehicle. He had trained relentlessly, 6 days a week for 12 solid months, pushing his body to its absolute limit. He was surrounded by a team of 13 other experienced individuals, supported by state-of-the-art equipment and a world-class logistics operation. By all measures, Ryan Michael Torres was prepared. He had summited other massive peaks, including an 8,000er the year before, and understood the risks involved. He was not a reckless novice challenging a giant. And yet, all of that preparation, all of that investment and experience, would be rendered meaningless by a decision that lasted just 1 minute and 22 seconds. 12 months of meticulous planning, undone by 82 seconds of flawed judgment. To understand how a man so prepared could make such a fatal error, we must first look beyond the ice and the altitude. We need to understand who Ryan Michael Torres truly was. Ryan Michael Torres was born on March 12, 1994, in the city of Sacramento, California. By his late 20s, he had built a life centered around service and adrenaline in Denver, Colorado. He worked as a flight paramedic for an emergency helicopter service, a profession that demanded absolute precision while suspended thousands of feet in the air, often in the worst possible conditions. His work provided an annual salary of around $85,000, a figure that sounds comfortable, but was stretched thin by his true passion. Most of it was funneled into a savings account earmarked for the world's highest peaks. He lived a simple life in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, a deliberate choice to finance a dream that was anything but simple. Ryan was single, with no children, a man whose most profound commitments were not to people, but to the unforgiving slopes of ice and rock that called to him from across the globe. His family life was a quiet study in contrasts. He had a younger sister, Jessica, to whom he was deeply devoted, sharing a bond forged in childhood that distance and danger could not break. His relationship with his parents, however, was more complex. They saw his high-altitude pursuits not as a noble quest, but as a form of self-destruction, a constant source of unspoken anxiety. This created a subtle strain, a loving but worried distance. This duality was a reflection of Ryan Michael Torres himself. In his professional life, he was a man of protocols and checklists, known for triple-checking every piece of equipment and logging every detail of his training. But online, where he documented his climbs, another side emerged. He was impulsive, emotional, and driven by a powerful need to share his journey, a need that would ultimately place him in a fatal conflict with his own meticulous nature. His journey into mountaineering began not with ambition, but with grief. At the age of 23, in the year 2017, he joined a charity climb on Mount Rainier. The event was organized to honor a colleague who had been killed in the line of duty. Ryan had never considered himself a climber, but that ascent changed everything. He discovered that the intense physical struggle, the raw exposure to the elements, and the sheer scale of the landscape offered a strange kind of peace.
It was a way to process the trauma and stress that were an inescapable part of his daily work as a paramedic. From that point forward, his progression was swift and deliberate. He summited Kilimanjaro in July of 2018, followed by Aconcagua in February of 2020, and the formidable Denali in June of 2021, methodically building his experience. In September of 2022, Ryan Michael Torres stood on the summit of Manaslu, his first 8,000er, a mountain over 26,000 feet high. In just 6 years, he had gone from a novice to a seasoned high-altitude mountaineer with more than a dozen major expeditions under his belt. He supplemented his practical experience with formal training, completing rigorous courses in technical ice climbing and crevasse rescue techniques in the vast frozen landscapes of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. For K2, his preparation entered a new realm of intensity. For 12 solid months, he trained 6 days a week. His regimen included grueling sessions in a hypobaric chamber, a special room that simulates the thin, oxygen-starved air of extreme altitudes. He combined this with long endurance runs that pushed his cardiovascular system to its limits, and technical practice on towering indoor ice walls, perfecting every movement. But Ryan's obsession with K2 was not about conquering a mountain, it was about conquering himself. In August of 2021, during a harrowing call-out, he had been unable to resuscitate a 7-year-old girl trapped in a horrific car accident. That moment of failure haunted him, becoming the seed of a severe post-traumatic stress disorder. To cope, he created a YouTube channel he called Climbing Through Trauma, which resonated with over 153,000 subscribers. For him, K2, the savage mountain, was the physical embodiment of his inner turmoil, a brutal, unforgiving challenge. He believed that if he could overcome it, he could symbolically overcome his own trauma. The expedition was more than a climb. It was the intended climax of his therapy, the final triumphant chapter for the audience that followed his story of healing. Beneath the methodical training logs and public persona were private rituals that revealed the man inside. Before every major summit push, as he sat in the thin, cold air of his tent, he would listen to the song Fix You by Coldplay. It was the same song that had been playing softly on the ambulance radio during the silent, devastating drive back from the accident that had changed his life. He also had a small superstition. He would always tie the lace of his left boot exactly 3 times, a nervous habit he'd adopted on his very first climb. And tucked deep inside an inner pocket of his downsuit, he carried his most personal totem, a small laminated photograph of the little girl he couldn't save. It wasn't a reminder of his failure, but a solemn promise to honor her memory by living a life of purpose and courage. To stand at the base of K2, Ryan Michael Torres had sacrificed nearly everything. The $67,000 cost of the expedition was the result of 3 years of relentless savings, supplemented by the sale of his beloved Ford Bronco. He had taken a 3-month unpaid leave of absence from his job, a significant professional risk he viewed as a non-negotiable investment in his own mental health. Every decision, from the food he ate to the hours he slept, had been optimized for this single objective. He had poured his finances, his career, and his entire being into preparing for this one moment. He had done everything a person could possibly do to prepare for the physical challenge ahead. But a mountain is not a checklist, and it does not care about human sacrifice. On the 14th of October 2023, the world for Ryan Michael Torres was reduced to the small, focused beam of his headlamp. It was 3 hours and 15 minutes in the morning, and the 14-person team had been climbing for over 4 hours through the absolute darkness of the death zone. Each movement was a deliberate, conscious act against the crushing weight of altitude and cold. The rhythmic crunch of metal points biting into hard ice and the sound of his own labored breathing were the only constants. His fingers, even inside thick mittens, were stiff and numb. He checked his oxygen regulator for the 3rd time in an hour, a familiar protocol from his life as a paramedic. Everything was nominal. The team moved in a slow, steady line, a chain of small lights ascending into an infinite black void. To an outside observer, it was a picture of perfect discipline. The environment they moved through was beautiful but profoundly hostile. The temperature held steady at 36 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, a dry, piercing cold that found its way through every layer of high-tech fabric. A persistent wind blew at 28 miles per hour, making the air feel closer to 60 degrees below zero and stealing warmth with every gust. Despite the brutal cold, the sky above was a canvas of startling clarity, filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Visibility stretched for miles, revealing the ghostly outlines of distant peaks under the faint starlight. This perfect visibility was a double-edged sword. It offered a sense of control and predictability, a feeling that they could see any danger coming. But on K2, the most lethal dangers are not the ones you see approaching from the horizon. They are the ones hanging silently, directly above your head. The expedition strategy was built on a foundation of conservative, time-tested mountaineering logic.
The group of 9 climbers and 5 guides was operating on a strict schedule. The primary objective was to reach the summit no later than 11 o'clock in the morning. This would allow them to begin their descent with a significant buffer of daylight, aiming to be back in the relative safety of their highest camp before nightfall. A hard turnaround time was set for 1 in the afternoon, an absolute rule with no exceptions for any reason. For nearly 5 hours, the plan had been executed with flawless precision. The team was making excellent time, moving efficiently up the fixed ropes. There was a quiet confidence among the climbers, a shared belief that their meticulous preparation was paying off. Every step was bringing them closer to their goal, on schedule and in control. Yet, a subtle dissonance was beginning to emerge in the team's rhythm, a slight deviation centered on Ryan Michael Torres. While the others climbed with a singular focus on upward progress, his gaze would occasionally drift, framing the scene around him. He was not just climbing a mountain, he was documenting a story. He fell back a few feet from the climber in front of him, creating space, his mind working on camera angles and narration. His pace was strong, but his focus was divided. This internal conflict between climber and storyteller was a dangerous one at this altitude. But there was something more. There was something he had hidden from the team during the final gear check, a small device that represented his other mission. Something that violated the most important and non-negotiable rule of the expedition. The expedition leader, a veteran of multiple K2 ascents, had been unequivocal in his briefing the day before. He had gathered the 9 climbers and laid out the rules for the summit push with the gravity of a general before a battle. His most absolute directive concerned the section they were now approaching. He had pointed to a map, his finger tracing a narrow corridor high on the mountain's shoulder. His words were precise. Passage through the bottleneck must be fast, continuous, and without any stops, 0 exceptions. He had explained that the mountain's history was written in the blood of those who had lost focus for mere seconds in that specific place. The rule was not just about speed, it was about undivided attention. Any form of distraction for any reason was strictly forbidden. It was a simple command designed to counter a simple, brutal threat. At over 27,000 feet, the human body is in a state of constant decay. The lack of oxygen, a condition known as hypoxia, was beginning to subtly impair the judgment of every climber, including Ryan Michael Torres. His breathing was rapid, more than 25 breaths per minute, his heart pounding to circulate oxygen-starved blood. It was in this compromised state that he received his first direct warning. His assigned guide, Fazal Ali, a man with 7 K2 summits to his name, turned back and spoke in clipped, urgent English. "Ryan, Sahib, no stop here. Fast, fast." Ryan nodded in acknowledgement, but his mind was elsewhere. 10 minutes later, the mountain itself offered a more visceral warning. A small shower of ice crystals and rock fragments rained down from above, a clear sign of the instability of the massive ice cliff they were about to pass under. The first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon a pale, ethereal gray as the team reached the base of the bottleneck. The infamous couloir rose above them, a narrow 60-degree ramp of blue ice disappearing into the shadows. It was like the entrance to a cathedral of death. High above, invisible in the pre-dawn gloom but felt as a menacing presence, was the Great Serac, a hanging cliff of ice weighing thousands of tons. The wind seemed to funnel down the gully, carrying with it a low, guttural moan. The mood of the team shifted. The quiet confidence was replaced by a tense, focused silence. Every climber understood that the next 300 feet represented the most dangerous part of their entire lives. They were now stepping into the kill zone, a place where survival was measured not in hours, but in seconds. The bottleneck on K2 is universally recognized as one of the most dangerous places in all of mountaineering. It is a narrow channel of ice and snow, barely 330 feet long, located at an altitude where the air is lethally thin. The slope here is a terrifying 50 degrees, steeper than the steepest house roof you can imagine, and the surface is a layer of hard blue ice, often hidden by a thin dusting of snow that offers a treacherous illusion of safety. Directly above this passage, hanging like a guillotine, is a gigantic mass of unstable ice called a serac. This particular serac weighs an estimated 14,000 tons, the size of a 10-story office building, and directly below, the mountain falls away in a sheer drop of nearly 7,000 feet. To be inside the bottleneck is to be trapped between 2 absolutes, a colossal, unstable weight above, and an inescapable, fatal drop below.
This location's deadly reputation is not theoretical, it is a matter of historical fact. This exact spot was the scene of the single deadliest day in the history of K2. On August 1st, 2008,
A large section of this very same serac fractured and collapsed without warning. The resulting avalanche and the chaos that followed claimed the lives of 11 climbers in a single horrific event. The mountain did not discriminate between the experienced and the novice, the fast or the slow. It simply unleashed a force of nature that was impossible to survive. That day became a permanent, chilling reminder that the dangers of the bottleneck are not a risk to be managed, but a threat to be endured for the shortest possible amount of time. The ice holds the memory of that day, a silent warning to all who pass beneath it. The science behind the danger is both simple and terrifying. The massive serac is not a solid piece of rock. It is a frozen river hanging from a cliff, constantly being pulled downward by gravity. Even in temperatures far below zero, the sun's radiation can penetrate the ice, causing microscopic internal melting that weakens its structure. Vibrations from the wind or even from the footsteps of climbers below can travel through the ice and exploit these weaknesses. It is like a colossal pane of glass, riddled with invisible cracks, waiting for the one final vibration that will cause it to shatter. There is no way to predict when this will happen. It could remain stable for another decade, or it could collapse in the next 10 seconds. The collapse is not an if, but a when, making the serac an objective hazard, a threat completely indifferent to human skill, preparation, or desire. Because of this constant, unpredictable threat, an unwritten law governs passage through the bottleneck. It is a rule known to every single person who faces K2. You traverse it as quickly as humanly possible. You do not stop. You do not pause to rest. You do not look up. The goal is to spend the absolute minimum amount of time in the kill zone, a crossing that ideally takes less than 20 minutes. This rule exists for a purely statistical reason. Every single second spent under the serac exponentially increases the probability of being in that exact spot when it inevitably collapses. Speed is the only defense against a threat that cannot be fought or reasoned with. It is a fundamental principle of survival, a cold equation of time versus risk, a law that Ryan Michael Torres understood perfectly and was just moments away from deliberately breaking. At 5 hours and 41 minutes in the morning, at a precise altitude of 27,230 feet, Ryan Michael Torres made his choice. He was in the very center of the bottleneck, the most dangerous ground on the entire mountain. While the climbers ahead of him pushed on, driven by the unwritten law of this place, he deliberately slowed his pace. He let a gap of nearly 100 feet open between him and the person in front. Then, on a small platform of ice barely large enough for his 2 feet, he stopped. He clipped his safety line into the fixed rope, securing himself to the mountain, and stood perfectly still. He was now a stationary target in the middle of a kill zone, a lone figure against a backdrop of imminent, colossal danger. All for the perfect camera shot. His movements were slow and methodical, a chilling echo of the precision he applied in his work as a paramedic. His thickly gloved hands began the sequence. He reached across his body and unclipped his ice axe, lodging it securely in the snow beside him. Then he began to work on his mittens, pulling the tabs to loosen them, first the right, then the left. He peeled them off, exposing his bare hands to the brutal air, a temperature of 36 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. A searing, immediate pain shot through his fingers, but he ignored it. From an inside pocket of his downsuit, he pulled out his small black camera. He pressed the power button, and a tiny red light began to blink, signaling that he was recording. He was now a storyteller, not a climber. His logic, fatally flawed by the thin air and the immense pressure he had placed on himself, was based on a simple, arrogant calculation. He believed that the massive cliff of ice hanging above him, a structure that had been there for decades, would not choose to collapse in the exact 90 seconds he needed to film his message. The pre-dawn light was perfect, casting a sublime, ethereal glow on the surrounding peaks. He imagined the power of the footage, a man, vulnerable but determined, speaking to his audience from the gateway to the summit of the Savage Mountain. As he began to speak, Faisal Ali, the lead guide 160 feet above, turned and gave an emphatic, angry wave of his arm, a clear command to move on. Ryan simply raised a hand in acknowledgement and continued to speak into his camera. 10 seconds. The only sounds were the howling of the wind and the sound of his own voice, thin and breathless, narrating his feelings for a virtual audience thousands of miles away. 20 seconds. His bare fingers, now a waxy white, were beginning to stiffen, the first stage of severe frostbite. 30 seconds. He adjusted his position slightly, trying to frame the shot better, his boots crunching on the hard, unforgiving ice. 1 minute.
He was finishing his sentence, a message of hope and perseverance. 1 minute and 22 seconds. That was the total time he remained stationary. A lifetime of preparation, training, and sacrifice, all gambled on 82 seconds of digital content. In the cold, indifferent mathematics of the mountain,
It was a bet he was guaranteed to lose. At 5 hours, 41 minutes and 37 seconds in the morning, the mountain answered. 650 feet above Ryan Michael Torres, a section of the Great Serac weighing an estimated 12,000 tons fractured. It did not break cleanly, it exploded. The first warning was a sound, a deep, guttural crack that ripped through the air, a sound his camera captured with perfect clarity. A fraction of a second later, the sonic shockwave hit him, a physical blow of compressed air. Then came the avalanche itself, a churning, unstoppable wall of ice and snow, accelerating down the couloir at a speed of over 75 miles per hour. The perfect light he had sought for his camera was now illuminating his own destruction. There was no time to react, no time to even process what was happening. And then, exactly as you saw at the beginning of this video, the world was torn apart. The initial impact of the avalanche was a force of unimaginable violence, ripping him from the fixed rope as if it were a piece of thread. The sheer kinetic energy of thousands of tons of moving ice would have caused immediate catastrophic trauma, a mercy in the face of such overwhelming power. His body, now completely at the mercy of gravity and the avalanche, was swept down the 50-degree slope. The meticulously chosen equipment, the $67,000 investment, the state-of-the-art oxygen system, it was all rendered utterly irrelevant. In an instant, the climber was gone, replaced by a chaotic torrent of snow, ice, and rock. The mountain was simply clearing an obstacle from its path. The small camera, still attached to his helmet, continued to record, capturing a horrifying 47-second testament to the fall. It was a violent, disorienting montage of blurred images. The white of the snow, the gray of the rock, the deep blue of the morning sky, all spinning in a chaotic, nauseating blur. The soundtrack was the thunderous, grinding roar of the avalanche, a sound of pure, elemental force. The fall was not a clean drop. His body was thrown against multiple rock outcroppings and ice formations, each impact a brutal punctuation mark in his final journey. The 2,200-foot descent ended as his body came to rest in a vast field of ice debris at the base of the sheer wall, buried under the very thing he had stopped to admire. After the violence, there was only silence. The camera, miraculously intact though ejected from his helmet, landed on the snow nearby. It continued to record for another 19 minutes. The footage shows nothing but a sliver of the sky and the edge of a newly formed pile of ice blocks. The thunderous roar of the avalanche fades, replaced by the low, mournful whisper of the wind. There is no movement, no sound of life. The red light on the camera blinks steadily, a tiny, solitary beacon in a vast, frozen tomb. It is a silent, chilling epilogue, a mechanical witness to the absolute finality of the moment. The mountain is still once more, indifferent to the human tragedy that has just unfolded upon its slopes. The tragic irony is written in the numbers. Ryan Michael Torres had spent 12 months of his life in relentless, punishing training. He had invested $67,000, the sum of his life savings and personal sacrifices. He had climbed for nearly 7 hours that night, pushing through extreme cold and dangerously thin air. All of that effort, all of that preparation, all of that human will was completely and utterly undone by a decision that lasted just 1 minute and 22 seconds. 82 seconds of flawed judgment in exchange for a 2,200-foot fall. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, a final, fatal failure to understand that on a mountain like K2, you are never the one in control. The response from the mountain was immediate but tragically futile. Fazal Ali, the guide who had witnessed the collapse from his safer position above, was engulfed by the powder cloud but remained out of the main path of destruction. He instantly grabbed his radio, his voice strained by altitude and shock, and made the call to Camp 4. "Avalanche in the bottleneck! Ryan has been taken!" With those words, the summit push for the entire team was officially over. The shared dream dissolved into a grim new reality. There was no discussion of a rescue mission, because on K2, such a thing is a fantasy. Above 8,000 meters in the thin, unforgiving air of the death zone, there is no emergency service. Helicopters cannot generate enough lift to fly, and sending a team of climbers back into the active kill zone would have been a certain suicide mission. The mountain had made its decision, and there was nothing human beings could do to reverse it. For 3 days, the expedition was trapped by deteriorating weather,
a period of forced reflection on the tragedy that had unfolded upon its slopes. When a small window of clear sky finally opened, the expedition company launched a specialized high-altitude drone mission.
The small craft battled the fierce winds, its camera scanning the vast debris field at the base of the bottom leg. It eventually located the body of Ryan Michael Torres at an altitude of approximately 25,033 feet, confirming he was in a location that was completely inaccessible. Any attempt to recover him would mortally endanger a team of guides. But the drone mission achieved a secondary, crucial objective. Lying on the snow, a short distance from the body, was the small memory card that had been ejected from his camera. The drone was able to retrieve it. That card held the final 19 minutes of footage, a silent, chilling record of the aftermath. The finality of the situation was absolute. The body of Ryan Michael Torres was declared unrecoverable, and he became the 97th person to remain permanently on the slopes of K2, a silent monument to the mountain's unforgiving nature. After the memory card was reviewed, and with the express permission of his family, the expedition company released the final, harrowing footage. His family issued a statement that captured the heartbreaking lesson of his death. It read, "We are releasing Ryan's last words not to glorify, but to warn. May his story serve to illustrate the thin line between inspiration and recklessness in the pursuit of our dreams." His final act, intended to inspire an audience, was transformed into a solemn warning for all who would follow, a permanent echo in the vast silence of the Himalayas. The death of Ryan Michael Torres was not a simple accident, nor was it merely proof that K2 is a dangerous mountain. It was the result of a precise and fatal sequence of human choices. First, he consciously disregarded 4 separate and explicit warnings from his expedition leader, his guide, a fellow climber, and the falling ice of the mountain itself. He chose to believe his personal mission was an exception to the absolute rules of survival. Second, he deliberately stopped in the exact location he had been ordered to traverse without pause, transforming a calculated risk into a stationary gamble. Finally, he prioritized the act of recording a video over the act of climbing, swapping the focus of a mountaineer for that of a content creator in the most lethal office on Earth. Each decision, viewed in isolation, seemed small, but together they formed an unbreakable chain, leading directly to the final outcome. His story resonates because it reflects a universal human struggle. It is the voice in our own heads that whispers just one more minute when we know we should leave, or it will be different for me when faced with a known danger. It is the tendency to ignore clear warning signs when we have already invested so much time, money, and emotion into a goal. In the modern age, it is also the immense pressure to document our lives, to capture the perfect moment for a virtual audience, sometimes at the expense of living safely within that moment. But the ultimate lesson from the Savage Mountain is brutally simple. It does not negotiate. It does not care about your story, your sacrifice, or your intentions. There are no second takes. The story of Ryan Michael Torres, 1994 to 2023, is a permanent reminder of this unforgiving truth.